Welcome to this week's edition of Mississippi Happenings Podcast. My name is David Oles. I'm your host, and also with me is my friend and antagonator, if that's a word, antagonist, how about that? Is Mr. Jim Newman. Jim, how are you, buddy?
I guess I'm your alligator.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't go that far. Antagonist, I think, is what I was trying to pull out of my head.
Well,
Anyway, it's good to have you with us. We appreciate you listening in and, of course, watching us. We're excited today to have our guest, Mr. Cliff Johnson. Cliff is the Democratic candidate for the first congressional CD in Mississippi, which is North Mississippi. Cliff, it's great to see you, buddy.
Always good to see you guys. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Cliff, tell us a little bit about Cliff Johnson. Who is Cliff Johnson?
Yeah, that's been an interesting part of the campaign is having a chance to really think about how to describe yourself in a couple seconds or minutes. And I think, like so many of us in Mississippi, I have a deep connection to place. That place for me is Wallfall County down near Macomb in Tylertown. Both my parents come from that same little place, high school sweethearts. My grandparents were sharecroppers, worked hard. I'm James Clifton Johnson II. James Clifton Johnson, the original, my papa, was a big influence on me. And he was a man with a fifth grade education who milked cows twice a day, 7 days a week, worked construction between milking. My mama worked in a factory at Haspel's men's clothing factory and sewed suits. When she was younger, she described it as washing rich people's clothes for extra money for 10 cents a week back in the day. And so I was brought up in this world where, that man, my papa, would hold out his big sausage fingers, calloused hands and say, son, I never want you to have to work this hard. Get your books. That's what he used to always say, get your books. And so, I was raised by these two high school sweethearts from Tylertown. I refer to them as sweet Republicans who weren't very political, but were, conservative in all kinds of ways. They were raised in church. My dad was a landmark missionary Baptist. My mom was a primitive Baptist, hard shell Baptist. And, they took me to church every Sunday. Dad was a Vietnam vet. There were just kind of these conservative sensibilities, not raising a bunch of trouble, not causing a stir, not being ugly. And some of those lessons didn't take too well with me, as we'll talk about. But, I had this really idyllic childhood where I was, deeply loved, had good friends, and did take my books seriously and got to Mississippi College, went to the college Republicans meeting the first semester, first couple of weeks. And by the end of my sophomore year, I was president of the Young Democrats. Went to Columbia Law School in New York and had a great time taking a lot of really challenging courses with very smart people. Got married during law school, married my college sweetheart, who I started dating at 18, Lee. We've now been married 36 years. So that's the background, and then I came back from New York and got to work, and we can talk about that. But I've basically been focused on, protecting the underdog families, individuals against big corporations in my plaintiff's practice. As a civil rights lawyer and the director of the MacArthur Justice Center at Ole Miss Law School, really challenging our criminal legal system, trying to look at ways that it disproportionately impacts some people over others. The criminalization of poverty, David and Jim, has been a big focus. All the ways you come out worse just because you're poor, and have been, a lifelong Democrat here in Mississippi, trying to figure out, in recent years how we break through in a state that's much more like Georgia than it is like Tennessee or Alabama or Louisiana. We're close, and I'm part of that fight.
Got it. Jim, you want to get us started?
Well, David, just starting off, how does one man change what's going on in Washington?
Yeah, I have a quote on the wall of MacArthur Justice Center University, and it's Margaret Mead. It says, "Never doubt that a small group of people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." So, Jim, that notion of the agency, the impact of one person for me is something I've always thought about and felt pretty comfortable with, and it's just this notion that we all have a piece of the puzzle to play. And sometimes if you think you have to put together the whole puzzle, you have to eat the whole elephant, right? It can become overwhelming and you can get stuck. I'm a firm believer in the notion that an individual can not only, impact um, in the singular sense, vote the right way in Congress, encourage people to come along, but that you're part of something bigger than yourself. And so my belief about that is it takes a lot of one people to come together in Congress. Um, Particularly this go round, it's got to be Democrats, right? It's got to be people who are willing to resist the Trump administration, whether those are independents or disaffected Republicans. So I think there's this sense of it's always been small groups and individuals who have come together to change the world, and being very comfortable that as part of the collective, as part of the group, as part of a movement, as a civil rights lawyer, as a Democrat in Mississippi, that it is a bunch of individuals coming together that makes the difference. So that part, there are real challenges, but believing that I and or Scott Colomb or other people who are running for office can impact things, I'm a firm believer in the power of each of us as individuals.
One of the things that I was really impressed by when we talked to former Senator Trent Lott, he made the comment. We'd been talking about the balanced budget that Bill Clinton and Senator Lott got passed, and it's the only balanced budget we've ever had since 1968, I guess. But he made the comment that a lot of times he would just cross the aisle and sit down next to one of the Democrats and just have a conversation and just one on one. And generally would finish up, he said, by saying, "Who else do you think I should talk to? Is that what you're going to do?"
Yeah, and not only do I talk about that in describing what I'm going to do, but I talk about it with my students an awful lot, and that is this notion that you have to stay in the room, is the way I put it. You have to stay in the room with people who disagree with you. I taught my children, not to vilify everyone who disagrees with you, that you'll miss out on rich friendships and opportunities. And so I've always had friends who disagree with me, and I like the playful banter that you get with somebody like Senator Lott or others who are willing to engage, and I think it's good for you. And I think, Jim, it's one of the things I worry about as far as muscles that have atrophied in recent years, and that's the muscles it requires to be together in a room, to disagree respectfully and professionally, to have a fight sometimes if you have to fight. This happens with lawyers sometimes, right? And then afterward you ask, how's your mama doing and are your kids still okay? And there's I think it's really important. It's been good for me, this campaign, to be around people with whom I disagree, and to have conversations with people who are pushing back a little bit on me. But I think it's intentional, and I think one of the things that's important about that is Senator Lott's description of being the person who takes the step across the aisle. Right? I think we can't be passive. If we believe in that, that means that we have to step out and step forward and seek out those opportunities. And I'll do that. And I do think it's important. And one of the things I've said too, Jim, throughout this campaign is, I'm a first time candidate at age, I started at 58, now 59. I am very clear eyed about the priorities here. And the priorities start with local folks in North Mississippi. I sue the state of Mississippi and try to reform systems in Mississippi, not because I hate Mississippi, because I love this hot mess of a place. I mean, I dearly, deeply love this place, and we're a mess, and we know that. And I think it's part of what we all love about it. And Mississippi comes first. And so I was at a fundraiser, and Jamie Raskin was there from Maryland, right? And Congressman Raskin fought alongside Benny Thompson in the January 6th hearings. But I said in front of him, I said, look, when I get to Congress, if Jamie Raskin is trying to grab too much money for already wealthy Montgomery County, Maryland, to the expense of Saltella or Iuka or Hernando, I'll fight Jamie Raskin, right? It's this willingness to know people, have a relationship with them, and be willing to and able to disagree with them and maintain connection and relationships. That's work. It's easier not to do that, but I think it's something worth investing in.
It's what makes the world go round. And if you're not part of it, you're left.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think it's an interesting conversation to have with 20 somethings who I'm really optimistic about. There's a lot of folks who want to run these young folks down. I do not. I think they're smart. I think they're thinking a lot about the future and engaged. But I think part of what we want to encourage them to do, I do now that I'm the older guy giving advice, whether they ask for it or not, is just that, Jim. It's like hang in there, stay in that room. Go to the meeting that's the club that doesn't represent your thoughts, but represents the other side of the argument, and listen, be willing to listen.
For just to kind of, David mentioned that you were running for the first CD, and your opponent is Trent Kelly. But for our listening audience, the counties that are included essentially are the northeast 21 counties of Mississippi. So you've got from the Tennessee border down to, uh, Monroe and
Lowndes, Clay,
yeah.
all the way over to Tishomingo in the corner, and
Yeah.
753,000 people in 10,000 square miles. This is what's interesting. Those congressional districts in Manhattan are 10 square miles. Ours are 10, mine's 10,000. It only averages 75 people per square mile. So it's not easy to get that message out.
Well, you could have Benny Thompson's problem.
Woo!
Tennessee to Have you got 10,000 miles on your car yet?
Stay tuned. Oh, I definitely do, my man. And then some. And then some.
David, you're awfully quiet.
No, I'm listening and learning and making notes. Cliff, one of the things that you mentioned, you're talking about the criminality of the poor. Would you tell us more about that?
Criminalization of poverty. Yeah. So we look at situations, David, where people who commit the same offense, same facts, come out worse because they don't have money, right? And so that throws you into conversations about things like our public defender system, right? 85% of people in the criminal legal system are going to need a public defender. Lawyers are expensive, right? And they rely on people in most counties in Mississippi. 76 counties in Mississippi are doing this part-time, who have their own private practice, have other things going on. And Mississippi is one of only 5 states in the country without a statewide public defender system, where there are real challenges around the independence of our public defenders, the caseloads, the resources, oversight. So, that's an example where, whether you can hire a private lawyer or public defender in some cases really has an impact on outcomes because of the workload public defenders are dealing with and other challenges. You have situations where simple things like going to justice court or municipal court and you get a fine on a misdemeanor or a traffic offense, but you can't pay it, right? Because most 60+% of Mississippians don't have $1,000. 38% of Mississippians don't have a penny in savings. So if you get a $500 fine, there's no way. And then if those add up over time, 1,000, 1,500 for a lot of us, asking for 1,500, you might as well ask for 15 million. I just ain't got it. And what we have seen for years is judges around Mississippi locking people up, putting them in jail solely because they don't have the money to pay a misdemeanor fine or a traffic fine. And we have sued a number of cities and courts around that practice. And then you have something like bail, right? You're charged with a crime. The court imposes money bail as a requirement for release, even though the presumption, of course, is that you are innocent. Bail is supposed to be the exception if you're a flight risk or a danger to the community. But in Mississippi, we impose money bail in every felony case, 99% of felony cases. So what happens, David and Jim, right? People with money pay up, pay the bail bondsman or pay the cash and get it back at the end of the case if they pay it into the court. Never get it back if they pay a bail bondsman, by the way, the 10%. And people, and they go home and wait for their trials while people who are poor are stuck in jail for months or years while they wait for the process to work out, all just because they're poor. So we're challenging those.
But if you commit a felony, what is the guarantee that the state has that you'll even show up for court?
Well, what you look at, the factors you look at is this a person who's ever been involved in the criminal legal system before? Do they have a history of not showing up? You can put limitations on what people do. You can put limitations on their travel. But Jim, I think the question is better framed in what evidence does the court have that you won't, right? If we take the presumption of innocence seriously, which we must, we say we do, right? Because all you have is a charging document from a police officer when you first get arrested. And many times the facts turn out to be different and the charges are not ultimately felony charges, they're misdemeanor charges. So we have innocent people in those jails. Everybody in those jails is innocent, right? Prior to a jury trial. And the question is, what justification do we have for detaining innocent people in America prior to a conviction? So we have ankle monitors, we have ways of tracking people, but the notion of you have to buy your liberty simply because you've been charged with a crime is upside down and backwards.
Wow, very interesting. And to be quite honest, I know I've never thought about that.
Well, then, not disagreeing with you because I do, but it seems like the justice system, most of the people that I read about who have committed murders or attempted murder or some heinous crime have got at least 2 or 3 previous convictions and are out on bond.
Right. And so the question for all of us, right, is do we take the presumption of innocence seriously? And if the answer is we want to err on the side of public safety over the presumption of innocence, then we can lock everybody up until their trial and never let anyone out. We'll have to build more jails, right? But if somebody, Jim, is already out on another bond and then they get arrested again, those people aren't even eligible for release. There is a lot of people who are not going to be released because of the seriousness of the charge or because of history of violence. Those stories that you're talking about where people are out on a bond who are accused of murder or attempted murder often aren't the cases where people have long criminal histories and have there's a real sense that they might hurt somebody. Those are the stories that make the news because the tough on crime crowd, rather than what I would call smart on crime crowd, likes to seize on those, right? And they want to point out a situation where somebody was released, but there are very few cases where you're not eligible for bond. Now, in Mississippi, we have thousands and thousands of people who stay in jail pre-trial. And Mississippi, Jim, is a place where there's no time limit on how long you can be held post-arrest, pre-indictment. So the DA decides, if he or she wants to wait 3 years to bring an indictment. That happens all the time in Mississippi. You sometimes serve more time pre-indictment than you would serve if you get convicted of the underlying charge. So we have to figure out where the balance lies. For some people, their view is we can't risk it. I don't want any of these people out on the street, and I want more people held. For other people, they come down on the side that says we don't assume guilt. We assume innocence. We don't assume the police officer is correct. We make them prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And the one thing everybody agrees on, of course, is we all want to be safe. We want to have safe communities. We don't want to put our loved ones and our neighbors at risk. So, it's a serious conversation that I think comes from a place where people who advocate my position certainly agree that public safety has to be of utmost concern.
Let's talk a little bit about your platform. What's the number one thing on your list?
Working folks.
Okay.
Regular folks who just are living in a world where they've been promised for a long time that folks were going to take them seriously. They were going to think about the challenges they have making ends meet, not unrelated, David, to the issues we've talked about before. People who just don't have it, whether it's have it to pay a fine in the municipal court and wind up going to jail because they're poor, whether it's they don't have it because you go buy 2 of those little plastic bags of groceries at Kroger and you come out and it's $80 somehow and you don't know what just happened to you because of insurance costs, electricity costs, because of tariffs, taxes that have occurred during the Trump administration. But we have to focus on the reality, economic reality of working folks in North Mississippi who just can't make the math work. And David, those are Republicans, independents, Democrats alike who are struggling. So we've got this, HB1 so-called big, beautiful bill that we still haven't felt all the implications of yet, that we have to fight back against. So that's one. The second thing is we've got to deal with a corrupt system, that's a rigged system where, the president making billions with a B, he and his family, where corporations have disproportionate impact. My opponent, Congressman Kelly, half his money, campaign money, comes from corporations, nearly $3 million. And the influence that those people have in Congress, members of Congress trading individual stocks, becoming lobbyists the minute they walk out of Congress and getting rich. People don't like that. And then we've of course post the Supreme Court Calais opinion, David, we really have to protect fundamental rights, including the right to vote. There's a lot of folks out there who are at risk of being gerrymandered out of their voice, and that's a serious concern. We're going to have to revisit, I think, the Voting Rights Act. Okay. I think, Dave, when you're talking about these issues of economic opportunity, it's one of the areas I think where we have serious opportunities and challenges to reach across the aisle to our earlier conversation, where the question becomes whether folks who don't traditionally vote Democratic will recognize that Democratic candidates, the Democratic Party is focused on working folks in a different way and can pull the lever for a Democrat when they've said that they think they never can because of some other social issues that have been in the forefront of politics. So I think this is a very interesting cycle, because I think a lot of those folks who are hurting are our Republican brothers and sisters. And the question is, can you now, based on the fact that what President Trump promised didn't come to pass, can you now make change and elect people who are committed to reversing the impacts of these policies that are hurting our regular working folks here in Mississippi?
When you talk about voter suppression, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah,
What I hear, what a lot of us hear, what we see is, what's the big deal with having? I mean, just showing an ID, showing your driver's license. What's the big deal?
yeah. And so there are two things going on. There's the question of partisan gerrymandering that was the Calais opinion, and that was, whether or not race still has any function in considerations of how we draw our districts. Then there's the question you raised, David, about suppression, voter ID, voter integrity. And I think the first place you have to start on that conversation is there's just no evidence to support the claim that there's some sort of widespread voter fraud. That statement gets made a lot with certainty, and it's just not true, right? So
Hmm.
we're solving for a problem that doesn't exist. But look, I mean, the question of what's the problem with having an ID, what's the problem with making sure that the voter rolls are accurate. Nobody's trying to undermine the integrity of elections or allow people to vote multiple times or people to vote who aren't eligible. The question becomes, in the same way we ask how seriously do we take the presumption of innocence, is how committed are we that every person has a right to vote, one person, one vote. It's part of what makes us great as a country. And if you're going to require things like an ID, then who can attain an ID easily? Who can access that? How do you access it? What are the barriers to the requirements that exist that you impose on voters? And we know that disproportionately, again, poor folks, rural folks, folks who are older are impacted by requirements like this. So, do we all want integrity in our election? Absolutely. Is there evidence that we haven't had it, that there's been widespread fraud? Absolutely not. There's just no evidence of that. So, what happens is you scare people and you say you're going to have agents there, you're going to have federal agents at polling places in Mississippi. And now everybody who owes the furniture store money and is behind or owes the court some fines or has any sort of other issue out there that they think, the electric bill's been unpaid for a while, they get worried about they're going to be hassled. There's going to be problems that they're, somebody who is a documented immigrant but just doesn't want the hassle and their last name is Gonzalez, just says, golly, if this is how this is going to go down, I'm just going to skip it, right?
Yeah.
And then you have the kind of suppression that impacts outcomes and changes elections. And I'm worried about that because just the threat of it, David, keeps people at home. And I think we want to hear from as many people as possible. And voter turnout's been a huge problem in Mississippi and beyond. Folks ain't voting, right? And I think that makes us weaker as a country and as a state. And I think people need to take that right very seriously, or they may soon um, wake up and realize that they have far less impact and influence than they once did.
What along with that, there's been thought, or Trump has spoken about having ICE agents or federal agents at voting precincts, and apparently they had half a dozen or so up in Michigan. Uh, what is your opinion of ICE as an immigration tool?
Yeah, it's this version of ICE that we're seeing now, where we saw last year and has continued, this very aggressive militarized force that comes in with masks, that's been engaged in violence, that does these aggressive sweeps. I don't think people like the optics of that or the reality of that, right? The notion that we would have secure borders and that's important. Of course it is. We can't have open borders, and I don't talk to many serious people who think that we can. Um, if you have laws, should you enforce them? Sure, you have to exercise discretion, is always the case. But yes, you have to have people to enforce it. This militarized, poorly trained, aggressive version of ICE that we see now, I don't think that's what people had in mind. Jim, I remember specifically those debates when Trump was running in 24 about the type of people who were going to be detained, right? We're going to be murderers and rapists. And then he takes office and announces that every immigrant is a criminal because they're undocumented and because they came here without approval. And I not only do I not like that bait and switch, but I think there's a lot of Republicans who know these people, who know them from their local communities, who work alongside them, who admire what they've done for their families, the fact that they go to work every day, they go to mass, they send money back home to wherever they came from. They didn't think this is what was going to happen. And then to see this force, this ICE, meted out and turned loose on people we know and we've known for a decade across North Mississippi, working in these furniture factories and working in all these condos that are being built in Oxford and houses. All that shuts down if these folks go away. People know it, and it's not what they were promised. It's not what they were told. So I've got grave concerns about it. Deeply troubled by this version of ICE.
One of the interesting things that actually brought me to tears last night was on the NBC News. Uh, at the end of the broadcast, there was a young man from Rio de Janeiro. I don't know if you saw it, but he, he lived in the wrong part of Rio
Yep.
and left, came to the United States uh, as a teenager. I think he was maybe barely a teenager, but the long and short of it was he got a job at Wendy's, wanted to go to college, couldn't make it on a Wendy's payroll, and the Wendy's management said, "We got your back. You make the grades." And he's going to Yale.
Yeah, that's
If
amazing.
that's not the American story, I don't know what is. And when I saw that, I wanted to cry.
Yeah, and I think that's who we are, right, Jim? I mean, I
Yes.
think that's who we are. And you're not the only one who wants to cry when they see those stories. It is so much the American story. And I we think we see those images of people coming through Ellis Island looking for a better way, looking for hope, our grandparents and great grandparents, and it makes us proud of to be a part of this country. And we used to embrace this idea of the melting pot, and that was good news, right? Like, look at us, look at our diverse selves and how we all come together. And somehow that's been turned into something dirty and something wrong and something sinister by certain people. President Trump is the main offender. And that kind of xenophobia leads to very dangerous things. It's bad for us. It's beneath us. We're better than that. And for all the church folks out there, there's all kinds of texts like, show kindness to the strangers in your land because you yourselves are once strangers in the land of Egypt, right? Like, be careful out there. There's some gospel stuff that is inconsistent with the notion of these big, aggressive, violent ICE sweeps against people who would just want something better. Yes, yes, we have to control our borders. Nobody disagrees on that. What we're doing is beneath us.
How about gun control? How about the Second Amendment? What do you
Look, I
think?
mean, I have guns at my house. I inherited my papa, James Clifton Johnson the first. I have a couple
You have
guns
a
that he
flintlock?
had. Huh?
Did he have a flintlock?
No, they did not have a flintlock. No, but I think that people in Mississippi recognize that guns are part of our lives in when it comes to hunting, generational connections people have. That, and I hope people realize that there's not been any big effort to come in and take that away. What we know, what I know as a civil rights lawyer and someone who's done criminal defense work, right, is where you run into big problems is when you have young people, disproportionately young people, with semi-automatic weapons that are altered to be automatic weapons. We're not talking about, nobody's getting in a fight in the playground anymore, right? And they're now, we're not just talking about carrying a 38 special. We have kids who have access to military grade weapons who are wreaking havoc. And you know, I have found it difficult to understand why we don't want to make sure that we know who has these weapons, why they have these weapons, what's their background, and we cause people to take a beat or three or four before they are able to access those weapons, and they can't buy them in the heat of any moment. So, you know, obviously support the Second Amendment, also support limits on who can get guns, and very much supportive of background checks and regulation of these high power weapons that are now moving through the streets. Um, makes me nervous because we represented a ton of young people, Jim, who committed homicide offenses and juvenile life without parole cases. And what we know is young men in particular, our brains come in slow, right? Like we don't, our brain's not fully functional till we're about 27. And all the women who dated us will tell, will tell us that. And it's true. It's absolutely true. And so what happens when your brain is slick as a cue ball, doesn't have a wrinkle in it, is you behave impulsively. You don't control your actions in the same way. And so we would see kids who had access to weapons, who had access to big guns, who behaved impulsively. And if they'd just gotten in a fight, you know, that'd be one thing, but they wound up killing somebody. And at 14, 15, 16, they go to prison for the rest of their lives because they were involved with gunplay and not a fight on the playground. Serious problem. Serious problem.
There's a big article in this morning's Daily Journal about the foster care program in Mississippi. Not that it's a national issue, but I suspect that it is. It seems like Mississippi matched 22 of the 107 requirements for foster care. And I don't think that's a very good record, but, and I don't know all the ins and outs of it. But is there a
Yeah,
place
the
for,
question.
is there a place for the federal government to be involved in things like this that seem to be states' issues, but states aren't doing the job, so the federal government will step in and create some.
Yeah, I think we've recognized that for a very long time, right? I mean, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. We have programs that recognize that the state of Mississippi doesn't have the capacity to fund the retirement for all of its 3 million citizens without help. And so for those of us who focus on basic human rights, and certainly the ability to care for children. We've been under that Olivia Y consent decree around our foster care system for years and years and years. And so when you think about what is the role of government, the federal government, part of that is to step in those places where the government can promote life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Where there's the opportunity for us to, on a large scale, ensure that our citizens have their most basic needs met. That is not to say that everybody is going to be able to have everything they want provided by the government. And again, I don't run into many serious people who take that position. But collectively, we have the ability to step in to dire situations where people's lives really are at stake. And I think if the federal government fails to step in there, shows a real lack of leadership, vision, and compassion. And we've made, I think, Jim and David, I don't know what y'all think, but we've made that kind of historic effort coming out of the New Deal, where the government does step in to provide help and assistance and programs. When it's focused on poor folks, it's bad news. When it's a bailout for big corporations, or it's tax breaks, tax cuts for the wealthy, when it's welfare for the upper class, we think we put that in the category of economic development or good business. And but government assistance is government assistance, and the question is, who do we want to focus on? For me in my house, as I said at the top of the show, I want to focus on working folks, regular folks who are having struggle, hard time making it, and goodness knows that includes our babies who are in the foster care system.
Another issue that Mississippi faces, of course, is health care. And let's see, Trump, or I keep saying Trump, the administration, which is kind of an all inclusive term, but it's pretty much the heads of departments that he's appointed. Uh, they want to do away with the subsidies that came in under COVID for Part D, which will probably take, I don't know, 100,000 plus Mississippians off of that. It will raise healthcare insurance premium costs for Medicare and Medicaid. And then when it finally gets done, we'll have more hospital closures. At what point, at what point does the government step in and support hospitals? Or is that
Yeah.
an option? I
Well,
mean,
yeah, I think now, I think we can't wait, right? We talk about how rural our district is, right? How rural Mississippi is. And I know from my parents living in Tylertown, right? Walthall General, you might not want to have brain surgery at Walthall General, but let me tell you what, you have a stroke, heart attack, an automobile accident, and you have the ability to be stabilized at Walthall General before you go on to Macomb or Hattiesburg. You're mighty glad to have it there, and you want that access. Or if Mama needs to be in a swing bed, it makes a huge difference if she can be in the local community where you can see her and tend to her and love on her, as opposed to everybody having to go off to Jackson or Memphis if you live in North Mississippi, or Tupelo if you live, down in Lowndes County, or in the Delta. So, it is, um, it's the reality in Mississippi that there is help that's actually available, where the government tried to step in with the opportunity for Medicaid expansion, and we just rejected it. There's opportunities to feed 320,000 children this summer, right? With funds for kids who get free and reduced lunch during the school year to make sure they're okay in the summer. $38 million. Mississippi said no to it, right? It's this notion that if it comes from the government, it's bad. It's this notion that people somehow need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and that people don't want to work. And there's all this um, maligning of people who struggle, and making claims that they don't want to do better, and they are somehow addicted to government assistance that I find to be untrue and unkind. And I think, Jim, the time for stepping in and making sure those hospitals stay open is right now. That's why we've got to elect Democrats in November who will stand up to the Trump administration and turn that big, beautiful bill, as they call it, around. And look, Republicans aren't going to do it because we've seen what happens to Republicans who step out of line with President Trump, right? They get massied, right? I mean, somebody comes in. This is the problem that Trent Kelly has. Trent Kelly understands that if he steps out of line with President Trump, he's scared to death that he's not going to get a chairmanship of committee. There's retribution, right? There's consequences. He's going to have a primary opponent next time. And so he's voted 100% of the time with the president in Trump 2.0 because, like so many other Republicans, they don't want to make him mad. And that's why when it comes to keeping rural hospitals open, providing access to health care, voting rights, these basic fundamental needs, right now it's the Democrats who are in a position to provide those things because we'll stand up against President Trump. It's a critical time. November 3rd is so important because of where we are on very basic issues like that.
As we kind of close in on all of this and bring it all together, Cliff, why should voters choose Cliff Johnson?
Yeah, I think voters need to understand that I want to do this at age 59 as a first-time candidate, not because it's my goal to build a 20-year political career, become the president of the United States. I have spent a career standing up for regular folks, standing up to power, and now is a time where more than ever, I think we need people who have a proven track record of doing that, know how to do it. And we need, goodness knows, we need in Mississippi people who will do that on behalf of Mississippians first. I have been very clear, and I want to repeat it in saying that when I say I'll stand up to bullies, that doesn't just mean Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. It doesn't just mean Republicans. If it's not good for North Mississippi, I'm going to fight it. And there can be situations, y'all, we know this, where within the Democratic Party, when there's limited resources being spread around, that we get shortchanged. And we need folks in those rooms who will fight Democratic fat cats as well. And I think if people want a strong, independent voice who will stand up for working folks, then they should support me. I don't take corporate PAC money. I've committed to that, and that's made it a lot harder. I've had to get all my contributions from individuals, and I have pledged not to trade individual stocks. I've pledged that I will not become a lobbyist. I'm not going to stay up there until I'm 90 years old. My expectation is that you go up there and you do 3 good terms and you turn it over to somebody who's young and eager, and you go up there and fight like hell at a time when we need fighters, and you don't stay forever. And so I think there are people who want it. The question, David, I think, is that D beside my name. When people show up at the polls on November 3rd, the question for a lot of people is, can they support a Democrat? And what I would say to them in all seriousness is, we don't have to agree, I believe, on every single issue to agree on the most important things. And the fact that we have so many folks hurting and so much work to do around economic fairness, economic opportunity, and just giving people a shot and relief, I think is all the reason someone needs to send me to DC and let me fight for that. Because what we have now, David, isn't working, and that's not the focus of the guy we have in the first district right now.
Understood. Jim, you got any closing remarks for us?
Well, yes, I do. These podcasts are not free. somebody has to pay for them. Uh, we are a 501c3, so contributions to support these broadcasts are a tax deduction. And we think it's important that the public hear from so many different people about all the different issues and have an opportunity not to hear David's opinion or my opinion, but hear the other individual's opinion, because that's the only way you're going to get any intelligence. Not that David and I aren't smart, but you don't need to listen to us. You need to listen to
We're
the
just smart
person that
alecks.
sees. Well, of course, we need to listen to the person uh, we're interviewing, because that's the whole point of the operation. So if you've got any extra funds, and I know it's hard to make ends meet every month, but if by chance somebody's got some extra money out there, we would appreciate a small donation. And David can tell you how to do it.
Absolutely. Yes, we do. Excuse me. Yes, we do need donations. Yes, we do want your support. Yes, we do want to hear from you. As far as donations, you can make Cash App, the $ Mississippi Happenings, or PayPal, which is the @ Mississippi Happenings. So, and please, our email, contact us. Is mshappenings1 @gmail.com. And also, you can leave your comments on where you subscribe, especially YouTube. YouTube. So, Cliff, once again, thank you so much. It's great to see you. Good luck. And, what do you got? 100 days, 90 days? You just
Less
count.
than 90. We're down to like 87. It's closing in.
All right. Well, good luck. And we do appreciate it. And as always, may we never be indifferent to the suffering of others.
Amen. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.